Hello world of YouTube, and welcome to another Carversation, the show where I sit down with a topic on my mind and I talk about it in my car for a little bit before passing the buck on to you and asking how you feel about a subject, and we continue the conversation down in the comments down below. Today I'm going to be using my newscaster tone to address this topic. I'm going to be talking about something that, actually, it's funny, as of posting this, Anthony Fantano just made a video on yesterday. It's a topic that I've also been curious about, but more than just his particular video. And I'm sure he's made a video about the other parts of this, because the dude, and he's the internet's busiest music nerd. The subject I'm talking about is the current state of album releases. Or the current trends in album releases, and how it feels like artists are trying to redefine what it means to release a project. You know, Kanye, and I've been talking about Kanye a lot in this video.
Nike, Google
has done a lot of these, or a couple of these trends I'll be addressing, and I won't be surprised if he does the one that's currently in heavy circulation. But seemingly over the last 5-6 years, artists have been really fine-tuning the idea of changing, releasing a project. You know, since recorded music was a thing, really the trend was you drop an LP. You know, maybe as time went on, people started to drop singles to tease the release of an LP, and then they would drop singles afterwards of popular songs to help keep the record in circulation. And the length of that LP was really limited to the hardware at our disposal. You know, we had, back in the 70s, you know, you had to keep it to the length of a record, what a record could hold. You know, and then with the advent of tape and digital out forms, especially with CDs, albums could really be much longer than just what was limited to the length of an LP. But now, in the digital landscape, everything is off bars. Artists are dropping LPs at various lengths. They're releasing chunks of it at a time, and even in some instances now they're fine-tuning that release post, you know, dropping it and almost giving it like DLC. It's weird, you know. It honestly, a lot of it reminds me of the video game release model, like the current landscape of that, at least in some instances. The one trend that seemingly was tied to strictly 2018 were micro albums. You know, artists releasing an EP's worth of work into one release. And honestly, that was a really interesting trend, something that I wouldn't mind seeing more artists explore. You know, the limitations of, we're gonna do this many songs for this album and see what we can pull together and see if we can make a cohesive LP. But the trends that I really don't like in modern music are the releasing of albums in chunks, like big chunks. Various artists have done it. You know, Hayley Williams is doing it now with her newest album. Kevin Abstract's last project was released that way. UBI, Ubiquitous of Strange Music, his last LP was dropped the same way. And I feel like that's a very spotty way to drop a record. I feel like it replaces the model of dropping a single or a couple of singles to build for the release of a project, and allows you to build hype for your project across like a year's time, with most of it coming out. And my fear with this release format is that artists are going to drop unfinished songs. Like, straight up, I fear that we will get an album at some point released in this format where you'll have basically the demo version of a song on one of these like slices of the album, and then the album proper you'll get the finished product. And I feel like that's not cohesive to conducive creation. I feel like it breeds and there's a similar problem to there's a similar fear to the other problem I'll address. But I feel like these chunks of records also tease too much at a time and maybe give people the wrong impression of a project. You know, singles did that just fine. We don't need chunks of an album doing that because it's not in proper sequence of what the album actually is. You know, people could say that Death Grips kind of started this trend. Anthony addressed that in his video where the Powers That Be was released in 2 chunks, but I feel like that is a different circumstance because they released like 2 different creative sides of a project at 2 different time periods and pulled them together. You know, you could argue disc 1 and disc 2, while both very different for Death Grips, and that kind of fits why they went together, are sonically pretty different from each other. One uses the Bjork vocal samples throughout the entire thing, and then the other one is this like super up to 1,000,000 version of other Death Grips ideas infused with a lot of punk rock ideals. And so I can see why Death Grips did that with those 2 halves of Powers That Be. But a lot of like what Hayley Williams is doing, or what Yubi did, or Kevin Abstract, of releasing a project in chunks, I feel like it leads to too much at once coming out for a project, and maybe a bad representation of how the album's going to flow and sound, because when an album is released, it is organized intentionally. You know, there's a reason why Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones spent forever just getting the track listing right for Thriller, because they wanted it to sound a certain way and they wanted it to flow a certain way. And I feel like releasing an album in this gets rid of that altogether. Anthony mentioned sort of the playlistification of music, and I mean, this is definitely like, it feels like it's a part of that side of contemporary music, and it's a little frustrating. I know that I have a whole segment indebted to that sort of ideal with Redacted, some would argue, but my intention with that project as a whole is to simply reinterpret an album and maybe give it more purpose with the track listing that works, or give it better flow. I'm trying to reinforce my love of that type, or that process in album arrangement, because I think it's important. I think it's important for an album to have flow, whether it be a slow burn to a huge climax, or a flashy opening with some tepid mid cuts before building to a climax, you know, or just all out assault, or just banger after banger after banger. You know, there's a million different ways you can pace a record, but I feel like by releasing it in chunks, you're killing that part of the process. And then the other one that I think is going to breed more laziness is the advent of fine-tuning and re-releasing a record. You know, it's different when it comes to like remixing and remastering in the case of like Rush's Test for Echo, because that record was just released at a time where production was done in a certain way that killed people's ears. So albums remixing and remastering is completely different than like dropping a record and then like 2 years later fine-tuning it with different things and different track orders and all that sort of stuff. Like that whole process, I feel like, which is what Kanye did with Life of Pablo, I feel like is the wrong way to go about dropping music, man. Like, I feel like this whole advent of almost DLC for a record is really not conducive to making a good project. I feel like it's going to breed. I feel like if people followed that mantra, they would start dropping, like they would follow what game designers do and have like the day one bug, or like the day one demo, or like a band drops a project but there's like clearly a couple demos in the mix, and listeners would be fucking pissed, because I feel like, especially if it's a big budget name, you would have better resources to fine-tune a project before you drop it. And that's a whole conversation about the game industry altogether. I have issues with the AAA day one bug fiascos that go on, especially with Bethesda. But I'm glad that the gaming industry in recent months has at least started the trend of delaying games if they're not ready. What a novel concept! And I'm glad that no other artist outside of Kanye has adorned this I'll fix it in post, or I'll fix it after the album's out mentality. It's just something that I'm talking about now because it's something that legitimately concerns me with the music industry, because the music industry is full of greedy people, because the industry is shit by and large from a financial standpoint, and that would be a way for them to, you know, make a quick buck. Oh, let's drop this project now and fix it later, and people will have to listen to that version. And it's just, it also is an advent of the digital age, of the playlist era, because you wouldn't have that back in the era of CDs and vinyl and cassettes. You wouldn't drop a project that was clearly not finished and fix it later and re-release it outside of remixes and remasters. But again, a lot of those are the advent of modernizing old sounds, which is something I'm also not into. By and large, there's some remixes and remasters that work, and that would be a list for a whole nother day, or albums that need remixing and remastering because they were made in an era where trends were not good for music. But this advent of making a project and fine-tuning it in or after it's out is something I just don't want to see. I don't want to see it happen. But yeah, that's my thoughts on this new crop of album formats. The only one we should really adorn are the micro albums. I think that was a cool concept that reinvented what it means to be an LP. You know, I like that 9 Inch Nails did it. I like that Kanye spent a whole summer dropping albums like that. That was really cool. What do you think of the current crop of released gimmicks and styles? Do you think they're good? Do you think they're healthy for music? Let me know in those comments down below. If there's a subject you would like for me to talk about in a conversation, let me know in those comments down below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons. If you would like to join their ranks, linked in the description is my Patreon. I'm gonna get out of here. I've been Foul Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.